Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, we have for years discovered and explored the intersections of national security, politics, and human stories, and it's never been more needed than right now. We've gone deep into Ukraine, and in the months and weeks to come, I want to go deep into Israel, into Gaza, into the Middle East. And as always, try to bring you authentic voices from important, inspiring, and/or iconic Americans, and some of my friends, people that I trust, people that I look to for guidance and for inspiration and for perspective. And our guest in this episode is a man who fits that bill. He is a real advocate and a champion for many great causes, and a friend of mine for almost 20 years. Finally joining us on Independent Americans, the great and powerful Elefant is here on the show. What's up, man?
How you doing? Thanks for having me, Paul.
Now, we might have a slight delay, but I'm really grateful to see you safe. Full disclosure, you're a dear friend of mine. You're a trusted advisor. We've worked together on many veterans causes. You were on the board at IAVA for a long time and helped a lot of us here in the States. And now you're deep in it in Israel again. But let me start with a first question. Where are you and how are you?
I'm okay, or maybe I should say we are not okay, as Mayor Adams would say. But I am in Israel and I am safe and I am healthy, and so is my family here. No doubt that Israel's been through perhaps one of its toughest challenges and events that are still playing out and unclear how they end. And unclear what the direction is. So these are tough times in Israel, but I'm here and I'm well and happy to be on the show.
So when this all happened, you're one of the first guys I was in touch with, and I knew it was only a matter of time before you'd go there and you'd be there. You're always kind of where the leadership is needed. You did the same here in the U.S., but you're an IDF veteran. You know, you are now, I believe, an American citizen. You have dual citizenship, right? You married an American woman. You've got three beautiful children in New York, and you sit on both sides of this. But can you start, Ellie? Because I know the story. You also generously helped me and a group from IAVA go to Israel years ago to see the entirety of it, and now that's come full circle. But can you talk about your personal, origin story? Talk about where you grew up in Israel and how you ended up in the U.S.
Absolutely. Just born and raised in Israel. Was born on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem, which I visited today. Some of the injured soldiers in this recent event. It was an interesting full circle experience. I don't think I've actually visited that hospital since the day I was born. But I grew up in a small town between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. I, like every Israeli citizen, served in the military. I started out in the special forces, became an officer, and spent approximately 6 years, 1996 to 2002. Had some very interesting training sessions and interactions with American Special Forces, which I still drawn and I recall enjoying very much. I fought at the time in what was the prolonged 18-year campaign in southern Lebanon at the tail end of it, and subsequently left the military in 2002, honorably discharged, went to college, traveled a little bit like every typical Israeli, went to college. And when I graduated, had the opportunity to come to the States. I was initially going to pursue a master's in the U.S. and got recruited into a private equity firm, and I've been there ever since. I later got my MBA at Kellogg. But in 2006, the second Lebanese war broke out. I was already a young analyst in New York City, living a life of that I didn't know before, and I flew back to fight in that 34-day war and to lead the team that was then under my command. So this time it wasn't all that foreign of an experience. That being said, I'm too old and too obsolete. So, and have no Gaza experience. So they did not call me up. That being said, didn't prevent. I don't think it prevented me from mobilizing. I've been living in the States and kind of on both sides of this, as you've identified. Very much both an American and an Israeli, and love to find the ways that the two countries interact in a favorable and a positive way. I studied politics. I studied international relations. So as a result, also very tied into the political system and the way things work on both sides of the ocean, so to speak.
I don't know if folks fully understand how many IDF veterans have really been supportive of the American veterans community after 9/11. I think you were one of the first guys to step up and help me and help us at IAVA. You understood what we were dealing with. When we went to Israel, we visited military sites, but we also went to social programs that were helping folks with PTSD. And I remember saying to someone, how do you deal with veterans who have PTSD? And someone said, over here, everybody has PTSD. That's what it's like when you have to live under rocket attack on a regular basis. But you've really been, I think, a powerful advocate for America, and also a liaison between Israel and U.S. forces, and a measured, thoughtful, reasonable voice at a time when I think this is so radioactive and polarized. I want to ask you, Ellie. You're a businessman now. You've had a successful business life here in the U.S. I mentioned you've got 2 little kids and a wife that grew up in Florida. Talk about why you're there now. What are you? Three kids? Did I say three kids. Talk about why you're there and what you've seen so far. Right? Take us over there beneath the headlines and tell us what you think Americans need to see and understand.
So I think there are many, we can use the term unprecedented, but I feel like that's one of those words at this point that's just rolling off my tongue too many times. These events are unprecedented. The way American Jews feel in the United States is unprecedented for the first time. And there really is a tremendous amount of fear. I spent about 37 days in New York since this started, mobilizing around how to help. Israel recruited about 360,000 reservists, which is a substantial amount. It is a recruited society, as you mentioned, the bulk of which were training and preparation for Gaza. But Israel's military doctrine has always been a multi-scenario doctrine, meaning a northern front, a potential southern front, and Gaza, a potential uprising of Arab Israelis within the West Bank. So Israel's basis point is, or baseline for that matter, is a multi-scenario attack on Israel. And that's basically what Israel has mobilized for. That's actually what the United States has mobilized, has identified and mobilized in the region. And that's why the support of the Biden administration has been unprecedented. I'll use that word again. I think in all of history, and that bond, I think, is very clear to identify specifically this time. The attacks on the southern communities in Israel from Gaza were something no one's ever seen before. Equivalent to many use the term Nazis. I'm not sure that's accurate. I think there's a discussion of whether this is similar to the pogroms in Russia. I'm not sure that's accurate. In fact, I'm not sure the term terrorism is accurate, although the entire objective of terrorism is to plant fear in a society, much like 9/11. It is symbolic, and its goal is to have a 10x effect on the population. My Upper West Side, New York City community, and the Jewish community in the United States spent the past 37, 38 days in absolute fear, with not going to dinners, concerned about what events, how to potentially make sure your child doesn't seem Jewish, people are being asked, are you Jew on the subway? Are you Jewish? And do you support Israel in a taxi ride? There have been protests. There have been pro-Palestinian protests that, from my perspective, are primarily born of ignorance as opposed to actually real anti-Semitism. But again, I'm not an expert. College campuses are problematic, and this uprising is on a macro level, both in the United States, Europe, and Israel, extremely concerning. That being said, the micro is Israel's battle with Hamas in Gaza and potentially Hezbollah on the northern border, and a very distant or relevant question mark about Iran and the existing Arab Israelis within the West Bank. I needed to see it firsthand. I needed to bring people that are part of a larger business network to here to understand what Israel's going through. And the truth is, Paul, it's actually very interesting. You feel better and safer here. Israel's military is strong. It's very clear that the country, which we can talk about in a minute too, which has been in political disarray over the past 40 weeks, 8 months of protests against what Netanyahu has led as a judicial reform. I don't pretend to have the hindsight's 2020. I'm not sure how much that contributed to these attacks and to these plans. I will say, when you are perceived weak by your enemies, that is generally a good time to attack. So there is no doubt that that played a part here. To what extent, I'm not sure. But the political environment in Israel today under this campaign, this war, is united. And it feels good to be here. It feels good to be close, because it feels good to know what's happening. There are still a lot of really difficult question marks. Iran, Hezbollah, what are the Arab Israelis going to do? What's going to happen in the West Bank? What's happening with the hostages? These are tough, hard questions that no one really, and I've spent now time with former heads of Mossad, Shabak, institutes that research globally counterterrorism. And the biggest takeaway that I have is there aren't really good answers at this point. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be.
Can I pause you?
And
Can I
that
pause you
doesn't-
there for a second? And I think that's a really important context. And for folks who are listening or watching, Ellie's in a difficult spot, so we may have some patches of difficult audio or video, but that's a testament to his flexibility in making this happen, and I'm grateful for that. Can you ground us in, where are you right now? There are like kids' toys behind you, and can you talk about what you've seen? We've seen it on TV, right? We've seen pieces of this, we've seen clips in here, but can you take us? You said you wanted to see it for yourself. What have you seen that other people need to see too?
Again, I don't want to use real slogans here that don't necessarily make a lot of sense. The southern communities of Israel that neighbor Gaza and that have been living under rocket fire for the past 15 years, since the keys to Gaza were handed to the Hamas, more at this point, 18 years. And everyone's kind of gotten used to that down south. Everyone's gotten used to that environment where rockets fly, you have 15 seconds to get to a shelter, and then you go back out to plow your field, pick the fruit off the trees, do what you're doing in these agricultural communities that are neighboring to Gaza. We went down to Kibbutz Be'eri. It's still one of those old communes. It's still a kibbutz. One of the few that has not been privatized. They actually have a print business that keeps them successful. And you're walking through a very pastoral setting of garden style homes with bikes outside and gardens and grills and washing machines that are on the back sides of the house outside, grass, backyard, decks. And what ultimately unfolds as you continue to walk through these communities is what looks like a guerrilla warfare attack on a pastoral white picket fence guard community like never before. RPG holes, grenades, houses that have been burnt down from within to try to smoke people out, families, unarmed civilians that have sealed themselves in safe rooms, atrocities that are, Paul, you and I have both seen devastation. We've been in war zones. You get used to it. Some people can't stomach the smells, the bodies. Other people have a problem seeing, structures that seem to be, that should be intact. A kindergarten, a mess hall, a clinic, someone's suburban home destroyed in a way that the problem walking through the fence, green grass American suburb. And when those two come together, it's kind of harsh. Right? It is not a battlefield. It's not a field in the middle of somewhere. It's not close quarter combat in a refugee camp or an area that has been devastated. But it is, someone's home, some community. It's someone's olive tree someone's garden, and very hard to see. It's also the first time that I've seen this tactic of guerrilla warfare in this close quarter environment, right? With missiles launched, grenades, and that's why I think it was very hard for these communities. First of all, the military didn't show up. The military was overwhelmed in other places. Civilians, there was a rapid response team, and they mostly died in most of these places because they just couldn't withstand 40, 50, 60 of these terrorists bombing and showing up with these kinds of ammunitions, landmines. They booby-trapped bodies. So when you went to rescue someone, and it's an atrocity at a level that is indescribable.
I mean, I think it's really important as a soldier and as someone who's lived in the States for you to describe this, because it's a slaughter, right? Like, people say terrorist attack, even your term guerrilla, it's a slaughter, right? It's a guerrilla attack, heavily armed people blowing apart civilians who have no shot, right? Like, that is the likes of which we really haven't seen, definitely not in the States, except maybe in like a school shooting, right? When defenseless kids are just mowed down by someone who's heavily armed. So I think that piece of it has gotten through, but I also feel like, frankly, like it's fading already in the United States, where so many people are almost desensitized to violence overseas. And now we've got this precarious place where there's, it feels like civil unrest almost here in the streets. We've got division in Congress. You're an objective political thought leader. You think about these issues. What do you say to the people, myself included, maybe, who might say, "Hey, Israel has every obligation and right to defend themselves. How they do it is the key. And are they going in too heavy right now? Has the response already been too heavy? Because they have the whole world on their side, like we did after 9/11. And now, obviously, we don't know where this is going to end up. We don't know what Gaza is going to look like in the end. Netanyahu is less popular than George Bush was, right? We know these pieces. But it feels like there is a sense, at least in allied countries, and maybe with Netanyahu, that they initially went in too heavy, and now they're trying to correct. But what is your take on it as a political thinker, as a veteran, and as a father of a family? You have also family members in the IDF right now. Objectively, this precarious moment where Israel is trying to keep the world on its side, but feels like it's lost its high point. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I feel very bad, and I think this perhaps may not be the most popular statement made. I feel terrible for the women, children, and civilians in Gaza. I do. I think war is a terrible thing. No one said it's ugly. No one said it's a surgical, pretty environment that you can operate and get everyone you want. That being said, Israel is one of the most, in my opinion, and not only in my opinion subjectively, is one of the most moral militaries on earth. I've not heard of anyone who calls a building they're going to bomb before to make sure civilians and children leave that building multiple times. I've never heard of a military dropping leaflets on on an entire civilian population, asking them to move south. I've never heard of a humanitarian corridor created so that Hamas can use it as well. But yet Israel is doing that. This Gaza has been, and let's also not forget that exact strategy is what Hamas uses as the at this point most vicious terrorist organization. They use the civilian population. They don't allow them to escape. The ones that don't support them, the ones that do help them, they do not dress. This is a breach of international law, by the way, right? This is a breach of the Geneva laws. They dress in jeans and t-shirts and pretend to be civilians and pull out an RPG. They have tunnels under hospitals. There were discussions and debates of whether they exist on. Of course, they exist under hospitals. Of course, they exist in schools, because Israel will not bomb those places, or has not bombed those places without, previously has not bombed those places, and is being extremely careful even now, because that's an excellent way to hide in a very dense population and a very dense 26 miles by 5 piece of strip of land. It's enabled them to be extremely successful. The United States does not have this kind of enemy at its gates. We rarely share borders. I mean, the U.S. shares a border with Canada and Mexico. And I would argue that if either one of those launched a barrage of 10,000 missiles into the United States, I don't think there would be a question about civilian populations. I don't think the Allied forces gave a rat's ass about how many civilians there were in Dresden. I don't think when Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, I think Truman was referred to as an act of kindness, actually, right? It was referred to as an empathetic, something, that kind of move to end everything was unprecedented. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that a nuclear weapon be launched on Gaza or that it needs to be carpet bombed. I am simply pointing out that Israel's at war. 1,400 dead civilians, 7,000 injured. Rockets continue to fly from Gaza into the state of Israel. A northern border that is erupted. Israel's in a state of war. The economy is shut down. Right, real estate companies don't have workers to build. Retail, there are no airlines flying into the state of Israel aside from El Al, the government-owned, partially owned airline. That is the only airline the state, you can't fly a private jet into Israel right now because you cannot get underwriter insurance. There are a lot of things. This is a real war. That being said, being in Israel, you understand how strong Israel is in its ability to deal with this kind of conflict, and it's going to take time. The message is time. And I'm not sure how the government's going to deal with that. I'll say the last thing I'll say, Paul, is it took 10 to 12 hours for some of these communities to get help from the military. And in those 10 or 12 hours, some of the most heinous acts that you can think of were committed. And on partygoers, on a young population dancing in the desert, and on communities, on civilians, on women and children, and not on military targets in any way, shape, or form. And there's a lot of distrust and lost faith in the government and the leadership that has brought us here, from the leadership in the military to the intelligence agencies, the Shin Bet and the Mossad, and in the government. and where we were focusing. It is almost like the internal strife, the political debate, which Jews and Israelis always like to kind of do to get to a better result. That internal strife almost was almost like Israel's population and society forgot the jungle that we live in. And thankfully, the military very quickly came to its senses and now is conducting an operation in a very successful manner, which may take a lot of time to eradicate and destroy Hamas. What the people on the street and what the population in Israel now wants, both on left and right, This was a country that was there was a lot of conflict, but right now, overnight, on a dime, everyone's united behind one cause, and that is victory. This needs to stop. This needs to change. The future of Israel depends on it.
Ellie, can you can we zoom out, because I think you have a good understanding of the complexity of the global environment, and we were a couple of weeks ago we were battling over support for Ukraine, and now there's been, I think, for the most part, at least in Congress, tremendous support for Israel, and probably will continue to be tremendous support despite protests in school campuses and in places like New York and others. I mean, I think the political leadership is pretty strongly behind Israel. However, there's kind of especially among maybe the speaker and the new speaker and others, hey, we can't support Ukraine because we've got to support Israel. Some are making it a choice between the two. Do you see it that way? And if not, can you explain why?
Someone said something today. Yuli Edelstein, who was actually in the Likud party we met today, said something interesting. He said, we had this false assumption that wars in the future will be fought by humans on keyboards behind screens and will end very quickly with very little human casualty. Clash of Civilizations, the Francis Fukuyama, The End of History and The Last Man, a lot of this debate that was happening in the 90s, about the geopolitical environment, and yet we are in 2023. We have an 18-month war in Ukraine, and now this, which is not something that's going to end soon. We have unrest globally, questions about China and North Korea. I have to go back to that simple notion that even though we are in 2023, there still seems to be an axis of good and an axis of evil. And it seems to be shifting in this most spectacular way to being on one side or the other. So we know that Russia, for a fact, at this point, is in bed with Iran on certain things. We know that axis is now happening through, we know these regional battles are now being fought by proxies of Iran through Syria, in Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza. And this is a problem even for the Arab world. Even for the Arab world, the Saudis want to probably march forward into the future while the Iranians want to blow everything up. So I absolutely see a connection here between Ukraine and Israel and everything that's happening globally, and this axis of evil being created, or this axis of good versus axis of evil. And it's actually amazing to watch. I don't think Putin is good. And I think Europe is going to have a very similar problem that Israel has in a couple of years. That's why you're seeing a tremendous amount of support from the UK Prime Minister. And I think it's aligning that way. I actually believe the Saudis and some of the Arab countries hold the keys to some of these problems if they make choices that advance them and everyone else into the future, synergetic choices. But it'll be very hard. And look, I'm certainly not. I have no inside information on this in any way, shape, or form. But as soon as 3 major battleships show up in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, you've got to realize there's a bigger picture here at play.
I think you've framed it up well, and I think I've been hard on President Biden at times, but I think he's been really masterful in framing that up. I thought his speech laying out the global landscape was the best speech he's ever given. I talked about it on this show. I talked about it in other places. Ellie, let me ask you to wrap this all together at the end. You're my friend. I love your wife. I love your family. I love your family in Israel. I'm lucky to have you and your family in my life and in my family's life. And I know, how deeply impacted you and so many of my friends are by this in so many different ways. And I also know America, right? And you know America. And you know that a lot of folks aren't going to be clicked in, right? And Thanksgiving is coming and they're going to click out for a couple of days and they're not going to be immediately connected to Ukraine or immediately connected to Israel. Let me just ask you on a very personal level, and I know it might be hard, but what's Thanksgiving going to be like for you and your family this year?
It's a great question. I think for the first time, Thanksgiving is going to be very different, or perhaps for me, for the first time, very hard to hold to do anything. I think it's going to be very similar to the last 38 days: less restaurants, less events, more head down. How can we help? What can we communicate? How can we explain what's going on better? Who can we lobby with so that they actually understand what occurred? Because this is a complex Middle East. Personally, very hard for me to imagine myself sitting on a beach somewhere, vacationing or taking the time off with my family, while my two brothers are serving, one up north and one down south, and my brother-in-law is actually inside Gaza with his reserve division. So difficult. And it may be difficult like this for a while. I don't put it past Thanksgiving. I mean, let's talk about New Year's, right? This is going to last for a while.
Can I ask you one last question, because you have a lot of wisdom to share always, and you and I can always thank you. One of the many amazing twists to our friendship is we've got Dr. Ruth Westheimer to thank for making our connection. Ultimately, we were at a Shabbat dinner, and Dr. Ruth told me that I needed to talk to you and that you needed to take us to Israel so we could see for ourselves. So, shout out to Dr. Ruth. And she's amazing. Absolutely. But she's one of many people who kind of carry the stories. You carry the stories. What are you telling your kids right now, man? What are you telling your kids about this moment? You're raising kids in New York, and you talked about all these issues, but you got to break it down for little kids. And how do you explain this to them?
That's a tough one. I'm a firm believer in giving your kids the information they need that is appropriate to them at the relevant age. So my 4-year-old doesn't know anything, but when I cry and play with him, he senses something's wrong. And the problem is when I'm playing with him, I see the 4-year-olds that are in captivity, and that's my emotional. I'm emotionally compromised, which is probably why I'm not a very good soldier right now. Or I wouldn't be a very good soldier right now, but others are. You have kids, man. When you have kids, it's a whole different level. It compromises you in a lot of different ways. So I try to spend as much time as I can with them and deal at their level.
And what do you tell the older? What do you tell the older boys?
Yeah, the older two understand that Israel is in a really tough spot. That Israel's been attacked. That Israel's mourning, and that Israel and the Jewish people have a 4,000 year of history, and ultimately will prevail. And that what's very important right now is to support Israel and to make sure that they are proud Jews and they're proud of what their country stands for, and support it in any way they can. So my oldest is on student council, and he'll do he ran for student council last week. I said, great, what's your speech like? He said, they're doing presentations. I said, bullshit, you're doing a speech. And he said, that's right, I'll do a speech. And I said, what are the 3 things that are important to you? And he said, well, the first thing is we're going to mobilize and do something for Israel. I said, great, what's point number 2? Point number 2 is we need longer recess. Okay, and what's point number 3? We need more snacks. I said, excellent. That's a great platform. Go for it. Because I also didn't have any time for him because I was working on trying to get supplies to Israel. And sure enough, he calls me on Tuesday and says, Dad, I won. 75% of the kids in my grade voted for me. Everyone voted for me. I had 15 votes more than everyone else. So that's wonderful. So he's going to mobilize at his level. And he's going to try to do, if you can get out to protests, anytime you can tell your story and what that story is. And this is why, Paul, I think, to wrap it up with you, humanity is not all that different, right? The American military and the Israeli military fundamentally fight for good. War is an ugly thing. Bad things happen. It is a given. But there are so many similarities and so many, not even similarities. We fight for the same cause. We fight for the same things. We fight for life. And the other side doesn't. And when we realize that there's one side that wants to move forward and take us forward, I think we're all united behind that cause. And that is the simplicity of what my children need to hear, right? We're for peace. We're for rights. We're for equality. We're for freedom of speech. We're for all these things, but we are prepared to fight against someone who wants to take them away from us. And that, I think, is the message that the simplistic message that I give my kids.
Your kids have all got my vote. You've got my vote. You and I share a lack of affinity for our mayor here in New York City. So maybe when you come back, you can run for mayor. But you're a very powerful voice. You've been such a great advocate for so many causes in the U.S. and now, in Israel especially. I think you're a fantastic voice for Israel. I think they should put you on TV a lot more often than other voices, especially because you understand, the American side of this as well as the Israeli side. And I'm just grateful for your friendship, man. I love you, appreciate you, and we stand with you, and we stand against Hamas, and we stand with your family, and against any of the hatred and nastiness that's happening out there. And I hope you're safe. And I'll save you a turkey leg for next year when we can celebrate victory over Hamas.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
All right,
thank you.
Be safe. Stay vigilant. How do you say stay vigilant in Israel?
I don't think you do.
You just say shalom?
Stay vigilant. Stay vigilant. What would stay vigilant be? You don't really say stay vigilant. That's not a parting. You just say shalom.
Now it might have to be, right?
Oh, yeah. Be ready.
I'll just say shalom.
Shalom. That's it.
Shalom.
That's what we hope for, man.
Shalom, brother.
That's the best way to part ways. Shalom, brother. Bye.
Shalom.